Hello people. This time I will talk about overload of information. In the past, basically the way of living of our ancestors was very different from ours in the sense that a lot of specialization, something that I talked about previously, is not exactly happening in the same way that happened in the past. Previously, we had highly specialized but also repetitive and simple tasks that were incomparable to the complexities that engineers and lawyers and perhaps even um, linguists and so on encounter today, right? With the exception of perhaps inventors that invented machines that were complicated, like for example Leonardo da Vinci's inventions, the invention of the horse uh, carousel. You call it carousel? The thing that goes behind the horses that pull people. Uh, That is an example of an engineering problem solved with wheels and the carcass and so on, but it's incomparable to the complexity of something like the combustion engine, the way the wheel turns in a car, modern car. It's much more complicated. It uses, you know, hydraulic force, etc. So the thing is, these technologies are getting more complicated, and people have to deal with those technologies. It becomes exceedingly complicated to a point of exhaustion of the resources in the mind. Um, in the past, for example, a way of transporting things was just knowing how to domesticate a horse and make the horse bring heavy merchandise for you. In the present, we use cars that are repaired by mechanics but are constructed by factories, and now they use robots to automate the process of manufacturing a lot of parts, right? Those factories also rely on other factories that produce parts. So generally there are assembly lines and there are welders of iron that create new parts of the car, for example, or the truck, or whatever mechanic machine is out there. And so this creates a very complex system of trade that allows them to create a synergistic way of commercializing something as complex as a car. The same thing happens with electric cars. You have very expensive batteries that energize the rotors in the car, and then it allows the wheels to rotate and the car to go on. Those complexities were not dealt by humans, and so now we have the technical and engineering side of specialization that is very different from the past, which was a horse curator, or I should say a horse domesticator and trainer, which is very different, very uncomplicated when compared to creating very sophisticated machinery like a factory, or what the factory creates, like for example cars, right? The same thing for processors, transistors and capacitors and all the circuitry in a motherboard of a computer is used and is actually created by many companies that trade their parts because no company can create an entire cell phone, for example, a modern multifunctional cell phone. They all, the vendor of the camera or the touch screen are all different companies, and then there's another company that gathers all those technologies into one phone that was engineered by a designer or an inventor of some kind. So it's a very complex thing to do in modern times to innovate because it's so complex. Another example is the abacus. The abacus is very simple, and you can do very simple things. Almost anybody can use it. You move the rows of, actually move the little balls that are in each row, and you can sum up any quantity, or you can multiply. In a computer, it's much more complicated to compute, but you can do much more complex things. You can even prove mathematical formulae by simply programming, perhaps not simply, but now the modern thing that we create in computers that is incredibly complicated is the video game, right? Or simulations of physics that happen before actually testing them in real life. So all those things are things that we had never done, and we have to deal with those with that complexity. Even in modern times, like old games, the beginning of the computer, the personal computer, and the spread of freeware games was something that a computer, just one programmer could program. Now with modern games like first-person shooters, AAA first-person shooters like Call of Duty or Fallout or Cry. I'm sorry, I'm not very familiarized with the names, but those games are incredibly complex. They have artificial intelligence. They have people for graphics, dealing with the graphics programming unit, the graphics processor, basically. Other people specialize in the assembly language of the processor of the target machines. You have people specialized in hardware that will run the game. There are specialized people in art, there are specialized people in composition, there are specialized people in sound effects, there are specialized people in physics and simulation of physics. There are people specialized in fluids and even within physics, like for example the simulation of ragdolls and simulation of particles and simulation of game engines that are incredibly vast and free roaming for the player, etc. Okay, so that is incomparable with one programmer programming a text adventure game, for example. Today you can create a text adventure game, and it's going to be a simple game. People might play it, but it will not be as famous as a AAA game because people want new things and new innovative and impressive graphics and innovative gameplay features. So we are basically presented with a very hard problem, and that is that our minds are limited, but technology is incrementally more complex because it is built upon previous technologies that were simpler. But as simple technologies accumulate, the ultimate technology becomes incomprehensible for just one mind. And that brings us back again to specialization. Just one mind can hold everything, yet there are erudites that attempt to understand the most that they can, but inevitably they will fail because it's too complex for one mind, no matter how genius that person is. So I will leave you with that, with a thought on how we can actually overcome that, even though it will entail the acceptance, perhaps, of cybernetics and cybernetic parts that enhance our mind, which is perhaps something morally dubious for some people. Thanks for listening.